Welcome to Business Chats with Debbie, where we talk big stories from small business. I'm your host, Debbie Wolberton, and today I've got Jess and Nicola Thompson from Maplebrook Estate Planning. I want to say Maplebrook Wills and LPAs, but I just wrote it down there, so I didn't get it wrong. So right. Thank you so much for coming in, because I know you've travelled quite a way to come here today. But I thought it'd be great to get in, because you know how passionate I am about clients having LPAs and up-to-date wills and everything in place, because people, it astounds me how many people do not know how important it is to have at least an LPA in place.
Yeah.
With the rule changes from quite a few years ago, people don't realise how much is at stake and how much it can cost you personally if you don't have an LPA in place and you need one. So I just want you to talk about why you need an LPA.
Why do you need an LPA? So LPAs are lasting powers of attorney for the people that don't actually know what one is. So yes, abbreviated to LPA, as you say. So what that does, it's a document that is relevant whilst you are alive, whereas wills are relevant to when you pass away in the main. So what does a LPA do? So basically, it's a document that allows people that you trust, your attorneys, hence the word attorney in the name, to make decisions on your behalf for property and financial and for health and welfare. So typically what a lot of people don't actually realise is even if you're married, so husband and wife, typically everybody just thinks that's fine, if something happens to me, my wife will make the decisions or my husband will make the decisions, and that's not actually the case unless you've got an LPA in place.
Yeah. And it can be weird. Do you know what I mean? Me and my husband have got, obviously, quite a lot of people married, got joint bank accounts. Anything happened to me, I haven't got an LPA in place, they freeze that joint bank account. He hasn't got access to pay our bills.
Absolutely.
Correct.
After COVID, it became quite newsworthy, LPAs, because people like Kate Garraway, as we all know, unfortunately her poor husband's been so ill, and she couldn't get hold of their finances. Now these are a power couple that earn an awful lot of money, but they couldn't pay their mortgages, their bills, and it's not as simple as you think of. Even if you've got a great friend who's got millions in the bank, they can't necessarily pay those bills still legally, causing untold amount of distress.
Especially when you've got enough distress going on with the husband.
And who wants to go and ask your best friend, even if they are loaded, can you pay my bills this month?
Yes.
If you've even got that option available to you.
And if you haven't got the LPA, then you've got to go through the whole route of what I can't remember what's called.
So this is the court that very little people know about. So it's called the Court of Protection. The process that you have to go through with the Court of Protection, if you don't have a lasting power of attorney in place, is very time consuming and very costly. And the problem with the Court of Protection is that they will make decisions on your behalf, rather than your partner or your husband, wife, etc. And the decisions they make will be based on what they feel is best for you, which is not necessarily what your family may feel is best for you.
And it's very expensive. You can end up paying thousands and thousands of pounds just to get access to your own money.
Yeah.
And it's time.
Yeah.
And if it's in a financial situation, it could literally mean that no one's paying your mortgage. And years ago, we all talked to our bank managers.
Yeah.
We don't now.
No.
We all get our loans or our mortgages and we speak to someone, and that's great. But that's it. That's the end of your human contact.
Yeah.
So someone else makes a decision in a call centre or presses a button or a computer robot. And then that means everything is frozen.
Yeah.
And that just means stop of life. Now, if it's in your business circumstance, which I know Debbie's a huge advocate in this case, that means that your bills aren't being paid, your staff aren't being paid, and
your business grinds to a halt.
Exactly.
And you may have had a stroke, and God willing, with the right care in place, you could be working again in 3 months, 6 months, but your business won't be there. That business that you've spent years
building up.
Exactly.
And do you know what I mean? It not just affects, do you know what I mean? You a sole trade, it affects every single business. So if you're a sole trader and you haven't got an LPA in place, no one can run your business.
Yeah.
If you're a partnership, there's two of you on the bank. One of your partners gets incapacitated, the bank gets frozen. So you can't pay your bills. If you're a limited company and you're the only one on the bank mandate, even if you're the only one on the bank mandate and you haven't got an LPA in place, your husband or wife or business partner can't can't pay your bills because the bank account will be frozen. And the far-reaching implications across the board are, do you know what I mean? You can lose your business, you can lose your house. It can break up families.
Exactly.
For the sake of spending a couple of £100, getting those in place before you need them.
Absolutely.
And as Nick alluded to just then with the business LPA side of things, what a lot of people don't realise is that the business LPA may be a separate document to the personal one for the finances, because you may not necessarily, or your business partner may not necessarily want your life partner to be running that business with you or making decisions. So sometimes that could by default happen, and that could still create problems within the business, even if the LPAs are not set up correctly for the business purposes.
Well, it's like in your circumstance, Debbie, your husband works in care. I'm sure he's not a number cruncher from what you've said in the past. So that's not what he does. It's not his talents. Yeah. And do you want him running your business? No. Does he want to run it?
I don't think he'd be able to. I think he'd walk the opposite direction if I'm totally honest.
This is it. I know Shane and Helen from the Cornwall channel, exactly the same. They two different skill sets completely.
So that's exactly it, isn't it? And typically one of the people that may be relevant to a point for stepping into run a business is actually an accountant. So quite often I have a discussion with a business owner. Yes, they will say, well, actually my partner, they wouldn't want to do that, they couldn't do that, or they just would opt out of that even if they became that person. So that's the other issue. You don't want them being the attorney if they don't want to do it. So typically what we do there is we look at who their accountant or other professional advisors are, and potentially look to appoint them as well.
Particularly in a sole traders situation, that's so important. And if you're going to appoint an accountant, you need someone like Debbie who does business accountancy, who understands business world. They're not someone who are just doing your VAT. Yeah. You need someone who understands you and your business, just simply so that they make, because it's all decisions, they're going to make those decisions that you can't. So they do need to know you.
Yeah. I think the frightening thing about quite a lot of people don't want LPAs is, it's to do with my death. No, it's not to do with your death. It's to basically, if you lose capacity, you have a stroke or you're in a car accident and you're not able to manage your affairs, then you get somebody you trust to stand in and look after them till you come back and you are able to do it. Do you know what I mean? I've got a client who's, I did send an email out a while back about LPAs, and he was on the phone the next day because he's in a partnership with his mum, and his mum's quite elderly. What would happen? And I explained to him, and you could hear they're like, oh my God. They would freeze the bank account. Well, how am I supposed to pay my employees? And you won't.
And two households, maybe mum and him.
And you're like, well, and do you know what I mean? It preempted him. He'd started the process, but she didn't want to sign. So well, they both go down the route of, she's an attorney for you, you're an attorney for her. You do both together so she can see you're going down the same route as her. And it worked. And now she's in a care home. Do you know what I mean? Weeks after signing the LPAs, she's in a care home.
Yeah.
It's so important.
It is, do you know what I mean? It's not just for the elderly, it's for the likes of me, you, and people who are younger. Do you know what I mean? These things happen to people who are younger than me and you.
Any of us can have a surfing accident down. Well, Jess won't, but hey.
Neither will I.
I would have done back in the day, but hey. Any of us can have an accident. Any one of us, as we know with COVID, can have mental health problems. Yeah. And unfortunately, as we all know, there isn't the same catch that there is with the NHS when you break your arm and leg as there is for mental health. So that delay can mean that your time getting back to work isn't as quick as you would have liked. So having an LPA, again, that's capacity. If you can't read something because it upsets you for whatever reason,
or you're just not able to process anything,
and that could be after a parent's death, it could be for any number of reasons. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, but we all know mental health is something we all need to talk about these days. So important, and it is part of the LPA.
It's such a wide spectrum from how people suffer from a tiny bit to as you said, in full-blown incapacity. They just walk away. Exactly. They're not able to manage their affairs. They can't do, and do you know what I mean? It's this is why LPAs are so important, and why I mention it on such a regular basis. I speak to people every time I speak to somebody new is, have you got an LPA in place? I don't even know what one of them is. And when I explain what they can lose or the impact it will have, do you know what I mean, from not having one in place, it's who do I contact?
It's like an insurance policy.
Yeah.
We have insurance policies because, I don't know, we get injured
For your car.
For the same
For your
reasons. For the same reasons.
You've got one for Flavie.
Absolutely. See, she got in there.
You have you have your insurance policies in case something happens. And
And
that's
this
exactly it. That's what it's for. It's in case something happens.
Yeah.
But
And you can always take it out the drawer, use it, put it back in the drawer.
Exactly.
It's one of them
It's
things.
reversible. It's not.
And you might never ever use it, but for me, it's just so important.
Definitely. But going back to us as individuals, as family members, they're important things to do. It's something I know particularly because, unfortunately, my dad had dementia, and it was early onset. He had it from his 50s. So if we didn't have those LPAs for finances and for his health, you had them separately. You need them separately because he was the person who obviously did everything with the money and such, because he was a man of a certain generation.
Yeah.
So my mum obviously needed to free up control of all the money and their assets. But also it was about who was on that LPA for health. Now, I was on it. I can openly say I've got one for my mum for obvious reasons, because it meant that I could go and choose the nursing home, the care he got, whether he needed a flu jab, whether he'd want a flu jab, because as his daughter I would know that.
Yeah.
All sorts of situations.
Because if you haven't
Absolutely.
got one, it's taken out of your control. People automatically assume if your husband goes into hospital and he's what I mean, he's on a life support system, then his wife will be able to dictate. It can be taken completely out of your control if an LPA is not in place. The doctors can overrule you because you've got no say.
Well, I know on these podcasts you're talking to Joss about the health insurances and circumstances. That's the same. You have that policy. I've got one of her policies.
You might never ever use it.
Might never ever use it, but you can choose which hospital. But if you've not got an LPA and it's for somebody else in your family, how can you choose that hospital, the right care? It's so important.
It's about what medication they want to give to somebody, and you might not want them to have that because they might not want it to have that. So yes, there's a lot involved to it, and that's why it's important as well. To deal with these things professionally and somebody that knows what they're doing when drawing them up, because unfortunately some people do LPAs themselves, and when it comes to it they're not really that fit for purpose because they don't really cover the bases you need to cover.
And it can be quite costly if you do it yourself.
Yes.
Because if you make a mistake and you submit it, they'll send it back and say, you've got to resubmit it. And then there's another fee for resubmitting the amended form. So you could bounce back. And by the time you've done that, it would have been just do me LPA for me.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because you know it's right first time. Do you know what I mean? You'll come out, you'll sit with people, you'll go through everything they want, and you'll put their wishes into a legal document, so they'll get what they want if they're not capable of doing it themselves,
and what they don't want to happen as well. You can put in there,
which is so important.
a lot of people don't actually.
Because you know what I mean, you could have somebody who ends up on life support, and you know full well that person does not want to be on life support.
Absolutely,
the doctors know, no, we're keeping them on life support.
Yeah,
well, that's not what that person wanted. Well, tough, you haven't got an LPA in place. Sorry,
they'll just
that's what we want.
Keep them alive and keep them alive, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Vice versa. And that will become important when you ever have to get to these awful cases where you have to go to court and argue that you want to keep someone going. So it's all documentation that can be used. So it's so important. But going from the health situation, we should also look at childcare. If you're a single parent, that is so important because it means
your children.
If you want your mum to look after your children and you want them not to have to go through the court system again, and of course mum will know how those children want to be looked after or how you would bring them up, or whether it's your best friend because they live down the road and they can still have the life that they need to have. Again, important, so important for everyone's welfare.
And it's added more heart. If it's not in place, it's more heartache you've got to deal with at the time that you don't you don't need extra stress,
Exactly.
extra anxiety. You pull this piece of paper out, there you go. That I'm in charge now. I can look after this person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can do everything.
And it is as simple as that, because when I've used the ones I had to use for my father, literally I would go into the matron's office, take a copy, they'd take a copy, and then every so often if they were having an audit, I'd take another copy to make sure that we'd got it, and we had those discussions. I then would get invited in, like they were having the flu jabs, can I just have a chat with you when I was visiting my dad? Oh, do you want him to have it? Do you not want him to have it? I'd get phone calls, unfortunately, when he had falls. Would he want to go to hospital? Would he be better in the home still? It works.
Yeah.
I'm living proof that it works.
Yeah.
And it made life so much easier. Yeah. And there was a number of us on my father's. There was my brother, my mum, and myself. So that meant that whoever
you
was
could
around,
share the burden.
and we could share the burden.
Yeah.
Again, so important.
And again, if somebody felt too emotionally attached to it, for example, your mum, too emotionally attached to her husband,
she could take a step back.
She could step back, and you could step in, which is essentially what happened. And it proved the way it was done worked.
But it worked. It worked for my mum. It worked for my dad.
Yeah.
And he got the best care. That's
Yeah.
all you
And
can ask for.
You can't ask for any more than that. So thank you both for coming in today, because do you know what I mean? I am really passionate about LPAs.
I know you are.
As you know.
Thank you.
So if you're sitting watching this podcast or listening to this podcast going, I really do need to get that in place, because people say, oh yeah, and it goes on a list and it keeps going down and down the list because something else always pops up that's more important. These are really, really important. Don't keep dropping them to the bottom of the list. Get them in place so you're protected and your family haven't got the anguish of going through the course of protection if these aren't in place, just to look after you while you're not able to. So it's Jess and Nick from Maplebrook Estate Planning who do your LPAs. They do other things as well.
We do.
But
if we do a getting to know you exercise, it's not about
it's not just, it's about everything. But for me, it was getting out the message of how important your lasting power of attorneys are today. So thank you both for coming in. It's been a pleasure. You can just Google them, you'll find them. If not, they're a YP member as well, so you can get them through YP membership and get those in place, because they're so important. So thank you guys for coming and joining me today, and I'll see you on my next podcast. Bye bye.
Thank you.